Asian Development Bank positive about Vietnam's economy. Vietnam's efforts to implement a national single window. Hello, you're with me, Linh Hương, and thank you for tuning in to this edition of Beastline, brought to you by VTV International. As usual, we start our show with several highlights in the economic scene for the past week. Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng met new Asian Development Bank or ADB country director in Vietnam Eric Sidgwick on Monday. At the event, Sidgwick praised Vietnam's economic development, attributing it to good management over the past 3 years. Vietnam's economy has rebounded with a stable macroeconomy, low inflation, good budget management, an acceptable deficit, and higher foreign currency reserves. Vietnam's public debts have increased but were under control, and that Vietnam has done well in restructuring bad debts. ADB was working with Vietnamese agencies to develop a 5-year strategy to provide Vietnam with long-term resources at low interest rate for infrastructure projects. In related news, Vietnam's economy will achieve a 6.5% growth this year and 6.6% next year. That forecast by the Asian Development Bank was announced in a press conference in Hanoi on Tuesday morning. According to ADB, in the first half of this year, Vietnam industrial production achieved 9.9% growth, mainly because of the boost in production of FDI firms. However, the country will face several challenges to maintain the high growth rate, including unstable global economy. Therefore, ADB suggested Vietnam to keep focusing on restructuring and supporting private businesses. Vietnam is ranked 52nd out of 141 countries at this year's Global Innovation Index, up 19 places from last year. The result was issued as part of a survey annually co-published by the World Intellectual Property Organization, US-based Cornell University, France-based INSEAD Business School. According to the report, Vietnam, together with China, Malaysia, India, Jordan, and Kenya, are among a group of countries outperforming their economic peers. Vietnam came third in Southeast Asia after Singapore and Malaysia this year, thanks to the considerable investment in science and technology over the past year. Any possible interest rate hike this year by the U.S. Federal Reserve will not prompt Vietnam Central Bank to alter its foreign exchange rate policy, the State Bank of Vietnam said on Sunday. The Vietnamese đồng exchange rate has sufficiently large ground to stay flexible against any adverse market changes at home and abroad, not only between now and the end of 2015, but also in the first months of 2016, the State Bank of Vietnam said in a statement. The central bank also reaffirmed that it stood ready to ensure the exchange rate balance by selling foreign currencies into the market when necessary. Vietnam hopes to become a member of the Banks for International Settlements, or BIS, in the next enrollment period. This was confirmed by the State Bank of Vietnam's Deputy Governor Nguyễn Thị Hồng in a meeting on Tuesday in Hanoi. If Vietnam becomes a member of the BIS, the central bank will have the opportunity to cooperate with the organization in investment activities and training programs. BIS representatives said that it would support Vietnam's proposal. Banks for International Settlements is a sustainable international monetary organization, promoting cooperation between central banks and financial institutions worldwide. Total FDI inflows into Vietnam have reached over $13 billion in the first 8 months of this year. Newly registered projects include major projects in garment and textile sector and include a fiber production plant and a $1.2 billion high-quality garment production facility in Ho Chi Minh City. Foreign investors are looking at Vietnam as it nears completion of free trade agreements with the EU, the Eurasian Economic Union, and South Korea. These trade agreements are expected to bring benefits to the garment and textile industry with the elimination of tax barriers. In addition, many global garment producers have moved their factories from China to take advantage of lower labor costs and preferential tax conditions in Vietnam. Those are several economic and business highlights from the past week. Up next, we'll talk about the efforts to reform Vietnam custom procedures and Resolution 19 in our custom. In March 2015, the Vietnamese government issued Resolution 19 on core measures to improve business environment and enhance national competitiveness. This is considered a preliminary step ahead of the establishment of the ASEAN Economic Community by the end of this year. And highlights of the document incorporate file processing practices and tax payment procedures to the average of the ASEAN 6, or the top 6 in ASEAN. These targets are hoped to be reached with the launching of the national single window in conformity with the ASEAN single window system. And how significant is the mechanism regarding business conditions improvements in Vietnam? That will be discussed in our crosstalk today with Mr. Joachim Parker, Country Director of the U.S. Agency for International Development in Vietnam. The agency is the core partner of the Vietnam Customs in implementing the national single window in the country. And before we talk, let's start with the following clip.
A national single window is an electronic system used to facilitate trade and increase the efficiency of the government delivery system. It allows a single point of entry for the submission of data, a single synchronous processing of information, and the clearance and easy release of cargo. The idea for an electronic national single window began in 1980 in Singapore, and the first national single window system in the world was officially adopted by the country in 1989. The TradeNet platform allows traders to submit their trade permits to the system only once, to be processed by government agencies within minutes. After just 1 year, 45% of the country's air and sea cargo documents were being processed through TradeNet. In Vietnam, the national single window debuted on August 31st, 2011, following Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng Decision 48. The system has connected ministries with Vietnamese customs agencies and information systems. According to the Trade Facilitation Agreement, or TFA, adopted by WTO members in 2013, country members shall endeavor to establish and maintain a national single window customs mechanism to support the timely import, export, and transit of goods. Thus, Vietnam, as a committed member of the World Trade Organization, is on the way to meeting this requirement with specific efforts set through Resolution 19.
Mr. Joachim Parker, it's a pleasure for us to have you with us in our show today.
Absolute pleasure to be here.
How important is the national single window to Vietnam's ability to access international practices and standards and to facilitate trade and investment?
I think it's very important. It again meets a number of Vietnam's strategic goals, economic goals. And we've been pleased through regional and local programming in USA to support the national single window and its integration into the ASEAN single window. So it supports ASEAN integration, it supports Vietnam's leadership within ASEAN, and also reduces the transaction times, improves efficiency, transparency, makes it possible for smaller Vietnamese business to more easily access export opportunities and make payments. So I think in many ways the national single window and the success so far in the government of Vietnam is a real example of how Vietnam can march forward on its reforms.
In December 2013, WTO members concluded the negotiation for the Trade Facilitation Agreement, or the TFA, as part of the wider Bali package. Since then, WTO members have also undertaken legal review of the text, and the TFA will come into force once 2/3 of the member countries complete their domestic ratification process. Could you tell us how the USAID has been helping Vietnam Customs in implementing the legal review and the ratification process?
Of course. Well, it's, for USAID, a very important part of our program to help Vietnam achieve comprehensive international integration and improve its competitiveness. And so our work with Vietnam on its TFA ratification process is an important part of that, mostly because TFA offers Vietnam a chance to show leadership on the ratification process, to go through some of the reforms that are part of its larger competitiveness package, and also prepare for trade in ways that will help it succeed with the FTAs, for example, the UFTA or the TPP. I think you will find that as Vietnam goes through this process, through USAID's programs that work with the Ministry of Industry and Trade, Ministry of Finance, General Customs Department, the reforms will be quite important for Vietnam's development and integration.
Let's now talk more specifically about the Trade Facilitation Alliance, which is a collaboration between USAID, AmCham, and VCCI. What other stakeholders get involved in this collaboration, and what is its target and implementation?
Well, the Trade Facilitation Alliance is tied most directly to the Bali Package, the Trade Facilitation Agreement. But it has larger ambitions as a vehicle for communication between the business sector and government on a number of different reforms. It's only started this year, so it's still gaining momentum. But what's exciting is that they've had meetings where robust exchange has happened, and additional businesses and associations seek to join. From what I understand from AmCham, for example, they see it as perhaps the most effective vehicle for affecting some of the most important customs changes in Vietnam, even more so than some aspects of TPP. So that's the value that the business community places on an alliance and the communication it represents with government. Just last month in Ho Chi Minh City, for example, more than 100 businesses came and met with customs officials to talk about these very reforms and how to best use the Bali Package for Vietnamese growth.
On September the 8th, Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng pressed the ceremonial button, officially launching the National Single Window Custom Mechanism. Attending the event, Deputy Prime Minister Vũ Văn Ninh, Deputy Prime Minister Phạm Bình Minh, and ASEAN Secretary General Lê Ngơ Minh spoke highly of the country's efforts in implementing its National Single Window. Vietnam's success in linking up with the ASEAN Single Window Network is a milestone for the country's customs. It is also part of national efforts to meet the commitment of the World Trade Organization's Bali Agreement package on facilitating trade adopted in 2013. Vietnam is also connected to the greater ASEAN Single Window Customs, along with Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. Member countries are able to share information regarding ASEAN's Certificate of Origins Form D and the ASEAN's Customs Declaration document. From 2016 to 2020, the mechanisms will be made available to all ministries and sectors in the form of online public services. At the same time, information regarding ASEAN Single Window import-export activities will be made available to trade partners both within and outside the Southeast Asian community.
Vietnam was one of the first 5 member countries announcing that they got ready for the integration of the ASEAN Single Window. Vietnam has also actively participated in the working groups of ASEAN when the ASEAN Single Window was introduced. How significant is this involvement?
Well, the U.S. government supports a strong ASEAN, both in terms of its role as a regional player and its benefits to development in each of the countries. The ASEAN Single Window is an important mechanism, once it's fully implemented by the 10 countries, towards integrating supply chains and bringing businesses closer together, giving Vietnamese businesses in particular a chance to more efficiently move goods and services across the borders in Vietnam. And it's an important part of Vietnam's reform agenda, I would say, in that all the different ministries that are involved in the various aspects of a national single window and the integrated ASEAN Single Window have to go through modernization efforts that will help quite a number of different practices.
The ASEAN Single Window will come into operation by the end of this year. What is your assessment about Vietnam's preparations for this milestone event?
Well, we're quite pleased to congratulate Vietnam in the launching event of a couple weeks ago, where the Prime Minister showed his support by being there, as well as quite a number of the ministries. I think that's a good signal that Vietnam will pull it together in these final months. There are some ministries that need to step up and make the final moves on integrating into the single window. But I have confidence that with that kind of deadline and that kind of profile, the government will make it happen. Mm-hmm. And we're happy to be part of the support for making it happen.
As part of efforts to domesticize its international commitments, in March 2014, the Vietnamese government adopted Resolution 19, comprising a set of government metrics for improving business environment indicators. The 2014 resolution and its successor passed in 2015 were tailored for Vietnam to reach the average levels of top ASEAN countries. 3 of the key performance metrics include ASEAN Top 6 averages by 2015, such as reducing time required to start a new business to no more than 6 days. In Vietnam, the time to complete all procedures has been shortened from 31 to 6 days. Reducing tax procedures to 171 hours per year. In 2013, tax procedures in Vietnam took 876 hours to complete. Reducing the time for import to 13 days and time for export to 14 days. In 2013, import and export in Vietnam took 21 days each. Additionally, time needed to pay taxes will be shortened to less than 121.5 hours per year. The percentage of local enterprises conducting electronic tax declarations will be over 95%, while the rate of electronic filings for corporate tax payments will be at least 90%.
Có những chỉ tiêu thì thực sự là chúng ta cũng đã đạt được ASEAN 6, ASEAN 4 rồi. Ví dụ như là cấp phép xây dựng, ví dụ như đăng ký sở hữu tài sản. Còn lại những mục tiêu khác, ví dụ như thông quan qua biên giới, đây là một chỉ tiêu cực kỳ quan trọng, tác động rất lớn đến môi trường kinh doanh Việt Nam, tác động và doanh nghiệp Việt Nam, thì có lẽ thực sự là khó.
Since its inception in 2014, Resolution 19 has been an initiative by Vietnamese government to reform customs procedures. Could you tell us more about how USAID has been helping Vietnamese government in implementing this Resolution 19?
Yes, we embraced Resolution 19 as issued by the Prime Minister because it offered a really important tool to work both at the central and provincial level and with the private sector on things critical to Vietnamese competitiveness going forward to allow it to take the next stage of development. Customs is part of it, but not the only part. Many other important aspects of competitiveness from the business perspective are part of Resolution 19. We've been working, USAID and other parts of the U.S. government, frankly, with different parts of the government at the central level, including MPI, MOIT, and others to help facilitate those changes through workshops, studies, dialogues, input on legal and regulatory reform.
What are your assessments of Vietnamese government's efforts, particularly their metrics to improve administrative procedures, shortening processing time and administrative costs for businesses so far?
I think there's a common assessment in the business community and also among Vietnam's development partners that Resolution 19 and all the work that goes with it in Vietnam towards competitiveness is really a critical piece towards making it possible for Vietnam business to take advantage of these trade agreements and to grow. The metrics were very important. My talks with business, including foreign and invested business here in Vietnam, suggest that there's good satisfaction with the progress to date on some of those metrics. And those metrics are ambitious, which was important. Vietnam wants to elevate quite a lot on the Doing Business Index, for example, reduce transaction times and costs for business. And that's what it comes down to making Vietnam a place where people want to invest and find confidence in their growth.
Besides the ASEAN single window and the national single window, what other efforts have been made by Vietnam Customs in order to modernize custom procedures?
Well, we've been privileged to work with Customs on a number of initiatives that are part of what I would call improved understanding with the business community. One of the best ways to ensure a successful implementation of the single window and other customs reforms is to ensure input for business. So, for example, historically, USAID's been working with the VCCI Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry on the Provincial Competitiveness Index, which is a way of assessing the opinions of more than 8,000 businesses and their views on reform efforts across government, and that's provided valuable insights. I think have been used by customs and other officials and also provincial authorities. More specifically and more recently, we've done, in coordination with the government, a survey of businesses to directly inform the Customs Department on its implementation of both the single window and also some of the other customs reforms that are required by Resolution 19.
For these vehicle importer, in order to acquire an import license, in the past they had to go through several steps. These processes could take from 10 to 15 days and cost a lot. However, now with the national single window system, dozens of required custom forms can be submitted online, and approval process only takes up a couple of days. The process is now much faster and also costs less.
Chỉ cần trong khoảng thời gian một ngày là bên mình có thể là hoàn thành xong là có giấy tờ để ra cho khách hàng rồi.
Quản lý giữa hệ thống cũ và hệ thống mới là tiết kiệm được, và theo đánh giá chủ quan của tôi cũng đến 80%.
The National Single Window System currently connects 9 ministries and over 2,000 enterprises.
Cơ chế một cửa nó là như là cái sự kết nối, một cái giá trị gia tăng để nâng cao cái hiệu quả của cải cách về hải quan. Thì khi mà cải cách về cái thực hiện cơ chế một cửa thì thứ nhất là các loại cấp phép, kiểm tra chất lượng hàng hóa vân vân được thực hiện thông qua cơ chế một cửa. Nó giảm nghĩa là đơn giản hóa hồ sơ. Và đơn giản hóa hồ sơ thì giảm các yêu cầu về thủ tục, giảm về chi phí. Cái thứ hai giảm về thời gian. Và cái thứ ba nữa là nó tạo sự liên thông về mặt quản lý giữa các cơ quan nhà nước với nhau.
As estimated by the Central Institute for Economic Management, with a total import and export turnover of up to $300 billion per year, Vietnam can save up to $1.6 billion annually. For each day, the clearance duration is shortened.
On the institutional side, what benefits can Vietnamese businesses get from being connected to the ASEAN single window?
I think the benefits will be substantial, particularly for active export and import operations. But we hope that through our assistance, that pool of beneficiaries will widen as customs procedures become simpler. But for example, transaction costs, having to show up in person to make payments, transparency in terms of dealings with the various aspects of imports and exports are just a few examples of the many ways in which there are benefits to companies, including speedier delivery times.
Mm-hmm. On a larger scale, what sort of impacts can the ASEAN single window have on Vietnam's socio-economic development and its trade relations with other ASEAN countries?
Well, as I said, USA is pleased to be supporting the government in its efforts for two primary reasons coming from a development perspective, which is what we do. One is to support Vietnam's leadership in international integration, and this definitely does that. The TFA, the ASEAN single window, many of the other efforts, of course, our work with government in preparation for TPP. But it also has important benefits, I think, in terms of benefits for the people of Vietnam through broader employment, broader-based growth. If we ensure that these reforms are implemented across the country, not just in the most urbanized centers, and work with that capacity building side of things to make the small and medium enterprises of Vietnam, which are the real job creators in any modern economy, fully aware of the benefits and ready to take them.
In your viewpoint, what should Vietnamese government do in order to implement the ASEAN single window effectively here in Vietnam?
There's two important parts to that. There is the legal reform and all the modernization that's necessary, but there's also a critical investment in human capacity that's needed, both in the public sector and the private sector, because a lot of change is involved in this. It's meant to make things easier, faster, more efficient, but training of smaller businesses in particular, working with business associations in the ways that we've encouraged through public-private dialogue, and building up capacity, of course, in the Customs Department and other areas where we have investments as well, will be essential to make it possible for Vietnam to take full advantage of the single window and be successful.
It is only 3 months away until the deadline that all Vietnamese ministries and agencies have to complete their targets pursuant to Resolution 19 to take their file processing time and tax payment procedures to the average level of the ASEAN 6. How do you think about this goal?
It is going to be a hard push, I think, but the track record so far is good. We've been working closely with the Ministry of Planning and Investment and the Ministry of Industry and Trade and some others on their implementation of some of these reforms. With the change in government coming, a party Congress and National Assembly elections, it's a challenging period to engage in substantive reform. But I'm optimistic, and I think many businesses are as well.
And once again, thank you very much for spending your time with us in our show today.
It was a pleasure. It's the most important subject that we're working on.
As Vietnam is celebrating the 20th anniversary of the country's membership of ASEAN, the launching of Vietnam National Single Window and its connection to the ASEAN Single Window signifies its enduring commitment to ASEAN's economic integration and community building process. The ASEAN Single Window will not only promote the harmonization of standards and conformance procedures, but can also facilitate coordination among customs administrations, the integration and transparency of customs procedures for modernized risk management and other concrete goals of the ASEAN Customs Vision 2015. And that just wrapped up this edition of Beast Line. Thank you very much for being with us. Repeats of our show are online at vtv4.vn or youtube.com/vtv4go. From our team here in Hanoi. Until next time.